Hi everyone, it's Jen again. So this week I was making more progress on my game. Decided to just kind of play some of the footage in the background here while I talk about writing. So I think in a lot of my other games where I have more gameplay, I can sort of get away with my pacing not being fantastic. I've spoken before about I believe that my character development is one of my stronger suits, but my pacing is probably one of my worst suits. So I remember when I was drawing comics, and one of the things that some of my earliest works, and I would say all the works that I pretty much did, would comment on saying that I needed more of an editorial hand to kind of rein in some of my pacing, that some of my pacing could be pretty drawn out. I think this has to go back towards some of my own personal preferences, that when I'm watching, reading, consuming media, I really like having some quiet space in between major events. I think of Miyazaki movies, for instance, where they have these just everyday activities that are really mundane, like eating or stopping to smell the flowers, so to speak, and it just gives me so much more sense of immersion and relatability to the characters in the world, that those are the types of instances that I really that really sell it to me. So I think maybe sometimes I might overdo it on these things because I tend to get pretty immersed in the settings and the characters that I'm creating, for better or for worse. I guess there's some positives and negatives about that. And one of the ways that I have tried to overcome some of this pacing issues is by sort of jumping right into the meat and potatoes of some type of event, conflict. And how do we do this in a way that is not completely jarring or disorientating for the reader or player? Well, a lot of times we use techniques like amnesia, or in my case of the last couple of games I've been making, transmigration, or that sort of thing, where the player is somewhat acknowledged to be thrown into a situation that they don't fully understand, and then they can kind of gradually learn more about the world as an acknowledged outsider. I don't want to rely too heavily on this crutch, though, so this time around with this story, I did want to give the protagonist a backstory, a life that they had lived up to this point. And I know that there has been some advice out there to say that you don't want to set up too much world building because you're going to lose your audience or it's going to be boring, especially in the realm of games and visual novels. They want to get right into having the characters, and they want to have whatever situation with the characters, because visual novels, for the most part, that's really what's selling the experience, is going to be interacting or getting to know the characters in the story. And I like this format because of that. But I don't know. I guess I disagree somewhat with the idea that the reader is going to be too impatient or have too short of an attention span to follow along with a story that actually has an opening. And maybe it comes from my own background of being a pretty avid reader of books, and these days I've been reading a lot of web novels. And so I think that I've been trying to learn to improve my pacing more from web novels than I have been from novels and games these days, because one, they are easy for me to read in whatever spare time I have where I'm trying to rest, and I'm away from my desk. And two, I think they do a good job with like sort of having a kind of hook every chapter. And so hopefully I'll be able to keep improving my pacing and my writing through like mindfulness and continuing to read shorter format, more concise kind of material. But probably will never be it will never be for everybody, right? So in this story, I have gone ahead and created a prologue. The prologue probably could have been twice as long if I wanted to go into the entirety of the main character's backstory, but it was a lot of like hardships, and so I kind of just decided to break up all those hardships into 3 major chapters that the protagonist will think about or reminisce about or dream about at the beginning or end of each chapter. So this is how I'm going to try to deal with like the pacing of like not slamming the player with all of the backstory all at once, as to not kind of like lose them, I guess, with all this like world building and character building. I'm hoping that the introduction is still like sympathetic enough,
Yes.
And interesting enough that the player can, be drawn into that. So kind of like having some solid foundation while also having some like intrigue and unanswered questions. So we'll see if this approach is successful. I realize that for some people, they like established protagonists that have their own really strong personality and backstory. Some other people prefer to have a little bit more of a self-insert. This might be the worst of both worlds, where I have an established protagonist, but the player is going to have the control on how the main character reacts towards those events. So if the main character experienced something in their past, it'll be up to the player to kind of decide, does this affect their decisions in the future? So whether or not they feel like, the protagonist would have like more defensive response because of like previous trauma, or the protagonist is not going to let those things in their past affect them and they're just going to move ahead without thinking about it or without letting them affect their decisions. I hope that the player can put themselves in those shoes, even if they haven't experienced all those things firsthand, to try to kind of imagine if they had experienced those things, how would they be able to persevere, or how would it affect their decision making in the future? So those are sort of my thoughts from a creative standpoint, where I'm trying to go with this particular story, with this particular MC, with this particular pacing. I do want it to kind of read like a web novel in a somewhat episodic fashion, that there is an overarching narrative, but I want it to have kind of clean breaks between chapters, that it feels like, okay, we've gone over this like one event, and now we can take a breather and we can put it down and come back to it later if we want. I think that's one of the things that I really appreciate in web novels, that they're just in these very like bite-sized pieces that are both interesting enough to keep reading, while you don't feel like you have to stay glued to your seat, or you'll forget what's happening, or you'll lose interest, or whatever it is. And maybe it's also because of how they're serialized, that forces me to wait, where I'm the type of person who would usually binge on a book and probably not get enough sleep for going to work the next day if I get really involved in a book. So maybe somebody like me needs like that slow trickled release to kind of like make me slow down and make me not binge everything and skim through everything and feel like I need to do it all at once. So that's the type of experience that I really want to try to translate to this mobile visual novel that I'm making. And I don't know, we'll see if it's anybody else's cup of tea. I do think there's a lot of potential in the web novel form, and maybe it hasn't really come over to the United States where I live as well as it's caught on in some other places. Like right now I'm subscribed to a Korean web novel website where I think the monetization is very reasonable. Like it's something ends up being like around like 10 cents a chapter of US dollars, and I find that to be so much more doable than a lot of the mobile apps, the way that those are monetized. I'd like to see creators get some compensation for their time, but I don't want to see it done in like an exploitative way, if that makes any sense, where you're exploiting the consumer by using various techniques to try to extract money from them. Like maybe it's too naive of me, but I would like to think that if a creator is giving their audience a worthwhile experience, if they are providing solid entertainment for the audience, and if their audience is able to give back, that they would. I would like to think that this sort of barter system could exist. And I don't know what it's going to take to be able to do that, because it does seem like a lot of money is wasted trying to get seen, for advertising, for platform fees, for these middlemen that have kind of like come in to be distribution. And I guess it's been like this for a long time in different forms. But I would think with today's technology that there should be a way for creators and their audience to just be able to support each other. Being as a creator, to be able to put your work out there to hopefully reach the people that could benefit from it, that could be comforted by it, that could be entertained by it, whatever it is. And then if that audience had something that they could get back, that they would be willing to do that on their own free accord, rather than being coerced or forced into it in order to enjoy the content. Again, maybe this is naive of me, but I would like to see this be a sustainable model somehow. And maybe it's never been done and never will be done, and maybe it can't be done, but I can always hope for a more ideal future. Wow, I'm really going off on a tangent. I was hoping to, honestly, I was not really feeling that great today, so I kind of was hoping to do like a playthrough of the introduction to my story. But then I realized that maybe the content is a little sensitive, so it would be better for people to kind of discover it on their own. Right now, I am tentatively planning on releasing the first 3 chapters, hopefully. By mid-October is my ambitious goal. I am done with the first pass of chapter 1. Chapter 2 and 3 are kind of my goal, because that would be when all the major characters would be introduced by chapter 3. And the story itself I don't think is going to be super terribly long. There's going to be some deviating routes that will be almost like completely separate stories, where it's going to take a very big path diversion. That will be in chapter 4. So I'm thinking right now, tentatively speaking, that would be for chapter 4 and chapter 5. And then any additional stories related to this world and characters would be separate games. So these are all going to be kind of small. Again, in order to make them like web friendly. Yeah. Let me know your thoughts. What are your reading preferences? What are your experiences, if you had any experiences with publishing on platforms, and What do you think about the idea of just having a how do I even phrase this? Having a trust-built bartering kind of system. Do you think that something like that could work, or do you think that people need to always pay first and then consume the content, as opposed to just being offered the content and of their own free volition donating to the things that they believe in? I don't know. I would like to get your feedback on that, because I'm not really quite sure what I believe in right now. I just know that I want to keep on making the stories that I want to make and improving on the things that I believe in and that I want to focus on. And I have the most freedom to do that when I can just do it in my own free time without any strings attached. All right. As always, take care. Have a great upcoming week. And if you're working on something, don't forget to enjoy the process. Bye now.